The crackdown on personal lines fraud by the insurance industry and the regulator has meant that employers and public liability have become targets for fraudsters. So how can insurers and their partners, like solicitors, fight back to root out this new menace? And what tools and technologies are available to help them? To answer these questions, I'm delighted to say I'm joined in the studio today by Sara Costantini, Director of Crif Decision Solutions. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you.
So, how has the EL&PL landscape changed over the past decade in terms of fraud? What do you think are the root causes of the changes?
The EL&PL landscape has dramatically changed in the last decades, and fraud around this area is absolutely a priority for the industry at the minute. Recent statistics issued by the ABI during last July and referring to the data of 2014 reported a value of claims in the area of £330 million. And this represents an increase of 20% with respect to the data of the year before. Around this, there is the modus operandi of the fraudster, because what has been analysed is that fraudsters in this area tend not to work in silos, but tend to work across the industry on the basis of not using one single database, but attacking more than one data source and more than one base of information. This, of course, is a different scenario to what the government and the body organized last year with respect to the personal line claims. In addition to this, fraudsters tend to organize gangs and tends to create opportunistic fraud, inflating claims or exaggerating existing values. All in all, examples around public liability and employer liability are in the NIHL area, where the claim is really simple. The industry reported 200,000 claims in the last year. Of those, only the 5% were eligible as true claims. This was very simple on the basis of an employer reporting noise and the poor quality of data and the poor quality of reports around this. Another area where fraud are quite relevant is the commercial, because again the industry is not organized in having one unique repository of information, but the data and information are quite spread around. This means that differently from the insurance fraud register or the Q database, fraudster can use different sources of information and insisting in where lacking of communication is. The insurance fraud register on one side provided the industry with a list of known fraudsters. The Q database for PI, for example, provided a valuable history of claims for the single subject.
Some interesting insights there. So how can insurers and solicitors best work together to manage these types of claims to tackle fraud? Is communication vital here?
Communication, collaboration, data exchange are absolutely vital, particularly when you can involve claimant on one side that can report the history and the value of the claim, when you can involve the solicitors that could cooperate within this, and when you can involve valuable claim handlers that within the process can help in managing the correct and honest customers on one side and can treat and evaluate fraud at a very preliminary stage. As a summary, we can say that the more the parties can share, the more the party can collaborate in, the less would be the risk of a bad reputation or even financial risk.
So is there a role for technologies such as ID verification and anti-money laundering strategies to combat EL&PL fraud?
The IDV service has changed in the use in the last period, because fraudsters tend to use false ID or tends to anonymize the data, because tools allow to do this. So having a powerful ID verification service is important to combat fraud. we have to state and we have to say that some of the companies use this as a tick-the-box exercise where they basically don't care of what is inside. But IDV is important to have an holistic view of the customer. This is because together with the ID verification you can get information on his past address, on his profile in the bureau, on the claim history for that subject, and this is important to onboard a customer or to know the customer better. In the anti-money laundering area, this is a valuable tool, particularly for solicitors. What is important to understand is that the European Parliament issued the fourth anti-money laundering directive on the basis of widening and expanding the usage of the anti-money laundering at every stage within the solicitor group and within the solicitor companies. This law will become regulation in the next 2 years when every EU member will need to fulfill to it.
And finally, are there issues with regards to data that insurers and solicitors need to be aware of?
Oh yes, the recent EU directive on data security force the solicitors and insurance companies to implement and have in place adequate security measurement procedures, data protection and data compliance regulations applied within the companies. This is because both insurance companies and solicitors do have a wide and huge amount of data and information on their customers through the life cycle of the relationship with them. It's also fair to say that cyber crimes around this costed a fortune to the industry. Last year, figures talked about £27 billion. Of those, a third were referred to data theft. So this is really a huge. On the other side, there is the risk for the insurance and solicitors of being perceived as not fairly and ethically treating their data. So there is also a huge reputational risk around this. The Information Commissioner Officer on the other side did his bit. So apart from the data security, the data protection and the data compliance was very much involved in the management of the data. So as an overall concept and as an overall summary, I would say that having access to different databases, investigating on the customer, sharing information, having a risk profile around the customer is absolutely mandatory to combat fraud and manage the risk properly. On the other side, though, data security and fulfillment of the appropriate data protection regulation is non-negotiable for the future of the industry.
Well, Sara, thank you ever so much for offering those insights.
Thank you.
If you'd like to find out more about the Crif EL and PL fraud offering, please check out the URL below. All that's left for me to say is thanks ever so much for watching. Until next time, goodbye.